If you spend any time around business acquisition content, you've probably seen the phrase buy a business with no money down. It's everywhere. And I think the reason it's so popular is because it speaks to something that's very human. The idea that you can shortcut capital, that you can get into ownership without having to wait years to build up cash. So this video isn't about dismissing that idea outright. It's about slowing it down and looking at what it actually means in practice, in real deals with real people and real consequences. Because there are situations where very little cash goes into a deal, but the way it's usually talked about online leaves out something very important. When most people hear no money down, what they picture is literally putting nothing into a deal. No cash, no cost, and often no downside. And in my experience, that picture almost never matches reality, because what people are usually talking about, whether they realize it or not, is no cash into the purchase price. And that's a very different thing from no money at all, because even in very creatively structured deals, there are still real costs involved. There is still real risk. So I think a more accurate way of saying it is no upfront equity, not no money, and definitely not no responsibility. Even in deals where no cash goes into the purchase price, there are still things that have to be paid for. And I know this from experience. You have legal fees. They don't just disappear. Due diligence still needs to be done. Accounting still matters hugely. And the business still often needs working capital. And sometimes there are also personal guarantees that we have to put into things. To think about it, at the very least, there's some reputational risk. So none of that is optional if you're doing things properly. So when you hear someone say they bought a business with no money and no risk, I would say it's probably just worth pausing a second, and either the deal was very unusual or some important parts of the story aren't being mentioned. And that's okay, but it's often the case. The most common way low cash deals work in the real world, from what I've seen, is through seller finance. And that's where the seller doesn't take all their money on day one, and then they get paid over time from the cash flow. So in some cases, the upfront amount can be quite small. It can be hardly anything. Sometimes it's even zero. But that only works if three things are true. The cash flow is strong and predictable. The structure is fair to both sides. And the seller trusts the buyer. Trust you, trust me, and so on. This isn't free money. It is what they call deferred. It's deferred responsibility. Another structure people often point to is something called earnouts. An earnout, which we're actually working on at the moment with another business, means part of the price only gets paid if the business performs after you take over. Doing it this way, they can reduce upfront cash, but they also increase pressure. And they only work when expectations, when targets and definitions are extremely clear in the share purchase agreement and in the conversations that you have. Sometimes sellers keep equity instead of taking all the cash, and that can be powerful because incentives stay aligned, because it also means you're inheriting a relationship, and relationships need some sort of strong communication and trust, not just spreadsheets. There are also situations driven more by motivation than price. So retirement is an example of that. Succession issues, burnout, health, complexity. We're dealing with a deal at the moment where with health is the challenge for the owner. And in these cases, flexibility can often appear, but even when those fundamentals still matter, cash flow still matters, structure still matters, and risk will never completely disappear. There's risk for the buyer and there's risk for the seller. There are also plenty of situations where no money down just doesn't make sense. Highly competitive deals are a perfect example of this. Asset-heavy businesses where they can be leveraged, so the owner says, well, why would I not take any money up front? Weak or volatile cash flow, and especially first-time buyers with no credibility. It's one of the biggest things that I came across. No credibility is the biggest challenge. In those situations, no amount of creative language replaces capital. Cash flow is the deal. What replaces money in these deals isn't a trick, it's credibility. So your ability to operate, to build relationships, to stay patient, to show judgment. Sellers don't finance to strangers from what I've seen. They finance to people they believe in, that they trust, and they've taken the time to get to know them. So a phrase I like is capital helps, but credibility closes. And it's something that sticks with me when I'm looking at a deal. So yes, some businesses can be bought with very little cash up front, but it has to be the right circumstances. But nobody buys a business for free from what I've seen. You always pay with either money, with time, with energy, with responsibility, and with risk. And that's the part that I tend to see people leave out. So I'll leave it there, but if you're interested in how acquisitions work in the real world, not theory, feel free to follow along. I'm showing the journey, and if you like the videos, please like, and if you want to subscribe, I'd appreciate it as well. And if you've got anything that you want me to try and do a video on, then pop a comment below, and I will do my very best to do that.